Welcome to a tale that invites us to reflect deeply on the complexities of human connection and the transformative power of empathy. Today's story begins in the bustling heart of New York City, where Alexander Williams, a man of immense wealth, found himself trapped in a life that was both enviable and empty. Alexander seemed to have it all: a sprawling penthouse overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, a garage filled with sleek, exotic cars, and a fortune so vast it could support generations. Yet, beneath the veneer of luxury, Alexander felt an unshakable emptiness gnawing at his soul. His life, though dazzling to outsiders, had become a hollow routine of exclusive social events, shallow conversations, and fleeting relationships. He was admired for his wealth but never truly known for who he was. No matter how many parties he attended or people he met, Alexander always felt profoundly alone. His fortune, once a symbol of success, had turned into a barrier, distorting every interaction into a guessing game about people's true intentions. Were they drawn to him, or to his wealth? Over time, this question consumed him, and his heart ached for something real, something honest, something money could never buy. Determined to escape the gilded cage of his existence, Alexander embarked on a journey to find genuine connection. He dated women from all walks of life, hoping to meet someone who would value him for his character rather than his wealth. But every time, the illusion shattered. Some were drawn to the power his fortune represented, others to the lifestyle it promised. Each disappointment deepened his despair, leaving him questioning whether true love and kindness were myths people told themselves to make life more bearable. One sleepless autumn night, as the city hummed outside his window, Alexander made a decision. If the world couldn't look past his wealth, he would strip it away, at least in appearance. He would step out of his opulent life and test whether anyone could see the man beneath the facade. The next morning, Alexander left behind the life he had built. He didn't tell his high-powered friends or his domineering father, a man obsessed with preserving the Williams family legacy. Instead, he slipped away to a small, rural town in Kansas. Disguised as a man who had hit rock bottom, he traded his designer suits for patched, threadbare clothes and let his carefully groomed appearance fade. To complete the transformation, he sat in a wheelchair he didn't need, slumped low to avoid recognition. His plan was simple but daring: live as a beggar and see if anyone would show him compassion. The town Alexander chose was a world apart from Manhattan. It was quiet and unassuming, with tree-lined streets, a few old-fashioned diners, and a general store that served as the hub of local life. Here, people still knew their neighbors by name, and life moved at a pace Alexander had never known. He positioned himself on a small corner near the general store, holding out his hand and murmuring, "Please, help me." For days, he sat there, invisible to the bustling townsfolk. Most people hurried past without so much as a glance, their faces a mix of indifference and discomfort. The rejection stung more deeply than Alexander expected. He had always been surrounded by people vying for his attention. But now, stripped of his wealth and status, he saw how easily he could be ignored. Each passing day chipped away at his resolve, and a dark question began to creep into his mind: was he destined to be unloved, whether rich or poor? Then, on a crisp afternoon, as the leaves fell in a golden cascade, a young woman approached him. She was unlike anyone Alexander had met before. Her name was Sarah Thompson, a local farm girl with an aura of quiet kindness. She had auburn hair tied back in a simple braid, soft brown eyes that seemed to see into his soul, and a warmth that radiated from her modest demeanor. Sarah had grown up with little but had always believed in helping those in need. As she stood before him, she noticed his weary expression and the way he avoided eye contact, as if ashamed of his plight. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Are you okay?" she asked, crouching down so they were at eye level. Alexander blinked, startled by her question. No one had spoken to him in days. "I'm just trying to get by," he replied, his voice low and shaky as he struggled to maintain his act. Sarah reached into her small, worn purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "I don't have much," she said with a sincere smile. "But this should help you get something warm to eat." Her generosity overwhelmed Alexander. He hesitated before taking the money, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't know what this means to me." Sarah nodded, her expression full of compassion. "Do you have a place to stay?" "No," he admitted, the weight of his deception pressing down on him. "That's not right," Sarah said, her brow furrowing. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Let me talk to my father. Maybe we can help." As Sarah walked away, Alexander felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Someone had looked past his appearance and shown him genuine care. Yet, beneath the gratitude, a knot of guilt formed. He had set out to find kindness. And now that he had, he wondered how long he could live with the lie that had brought him here. This was just the beginning of Alexander's journey, a journey that would test the limits of empathy, the power of love, and the weight of redemption. When Sarah Thompson returned to the small farmhouse she shared with her father, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, his weathered hands cradling a mug of coffee. James Thompson was a man of quiet strength, with lines etched into his face from years of hard labor on their modest farm. His voice was calm but tinged with weariness as Sarah explained the situation. "There's a man near the general store," she began, her voice soft but urgent. "He's in a wheelchair and has nowhere to go. I gave him a little money, but it doesn't feel like enough. He needs more help." James listened, nodding thoughtfully as she spoke. "We don't have much ourselves," he said after a moment, his voice steady. "But no one deserves to be left out in the cold. If you think he's in need, bring him here." Overjoyed by her father's willingness to help, Sarah returned to Alexander the next morning. He was sitting in the same spot, his figure slouched and his eyes downcast. She approached him with a smile that seemed to brighten the grey autumn morning. "My father said you can stay with us," she said, her voice brimming with sincerity. "It's not much, but we'll make it work." For a moment, Alexander was speechless. Her offer was more than he had ever expected. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "You don't know how much this means to me." As Sarah wheeled him into their modest home, Alexander felt an unfamiliar warmth wash over him. The farmhouse was small and humble, with creaky floorboards and the scent of freshly baked bread lingering in the air. It lacked the opulence of his penthouse, but for the first time in years, he felt at ease. James greeted him with a firm handshake and a kind smile. "Welcome," he said simply. "You're part of this house now." The days that followed were unlike anything Alexander had ever experienced. Life at the Thompson farm was simple but demanding. He watched as Sarah and James worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, tending to their crops and livestock. Despite their struggles, there was a sense of contentment in their way of life, a quiet pride in their hard work and a deep bond that came from relying on one another. Alexander found himself drawn to Sarah's laughter, which was light and musical, and to James's steady wisdom. They treated him not as a burden, but as a member of their family. Sarah often sat with him on the porch in the evenings, talking about her dreams and the beauty she found in the simplest moments of life. Yet, with every act of kindness, Alexander's guilt grew heavier. He had come here seeking authenticity, but he had built their trust on a foundation of lies. He wanted to confess, to tell them who he really was and why he had come, but fear held him back. What if they turned him away? What if their kindness disappeared the moment they learned the truth? The weight of his deception began to take its toll. One afternoon, as Sarah brought him a plate of warm food, she paused, her expression thoughtful. "You've been with us for a while now," she said softly. "I don't mean to pry, but I feel like there's more to your story. Who are you? Really?" Alexander's chest tightened, and he forced a smile. "Just a man trying to figure things out," he said, his voice strained. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Her gaze steady but filled with concern. "You can trust us. You know," she said finally. "My father and we're not here to judge you." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. And Alexander felt the walls of his deception closing in. He had come to find genuine love and connection. But now, he wondered if his lie would destroy everything before it had a chance to grow. The tension between his desire for honesty and his fear of rejection set the stage for what would come next. His journey, already filled with unexpected kindness, was about to take a turn that would test the very depths of his character. As days turned into weeks, Alexander grew increasingly enmeshed in the life of the Thompsons. He helped Sarah with small tasks around the farm. Even if most of the work was symbolic, James often shared stories about the challenges of running a farm, his voice carrying the wisdom of a man who had lived through hardships but never let them harden his heart. For Alexander, the simplicity of their lives was both humbling and deeply inspiring. Sarah's presence, however, was what truly captivated him. She had a way of seeing beauty in things Alexander had long overlooked: the golden glow of a sunset, the scent of rain-soaked earth, the quiet joy of a hard day's work completed. Her kindness seemed limitless, her smile lighting up even the darkest corners of his guilt-ridden heart. But that guilt grew heavier with each passing day. Every time Sarah laughed with him or James offered him advice, Alexander felt the weight of his lie pressing down on him. He had come here hoping to find someone who would love him for who he truly was. But he had built their trust on falsehoods. One afternoon, Sarah approached Alexander as he sat in the small garden James had built for him. A quiet corner filled with simple flowers and a single wooden bench. Her auburn hair gleamed in the sunlight, her expression thoughtful. "We've been working on something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's not much, but we think it might help." Before Alexander could ask what she meant, James appeared, carrying a small wooden box. Inside were neatly folded bills, money they had saved from selling vegetables and livestock. "We've been setting this aside," James explained, his voice steady but kind, "for your surgery. It's not enough yet, but we'll get there." Alexander's heart sank. He had never asked for their help, yet they had gone out of their way to make sacrifices for him, a man they believed to be in need. The box of money, though modest in size, represented so much more than financial support. It was a testament to their generosity, their willingness to give even when they had little. "Why would you do this for me?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James looked at him with quiet conviction. "Because that's what people do when someone's in need. You help them. It's as simple as that." The overwhelming guilt finally became too much for Alexander to bear. That evening, as the house settled into silence, he sat alone in the small living room, the box of money on the table in front of him. He stared at it, his mind racing with thoughts of how much they had given and how deeply he had deceived them. The next morning, as the family gathered around the breakfast table, Alexander took a deep breath. His voice trembled as he spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his heart pounding. Both Sarah and James looked at him with quiet anticipation, sensing the weight of his words. "I haven't been completely honest with you," Alexander admitted. "I'm not who you think I am." The truth, heavy and raw, spilled out of him. He told them about his wealth, his reasons for coming to their town, and the lies he had told to earn their trust. Every word felt like a blade cutting through the fragile bond they had built. When he finished, the room was silent. Sarah's eyes were wide with shock, her face pale. James's expression was unreadable, but Alexander could see the hurt in his eyes. "You lied to us," Sarah finally said, her voice trembling. "All this time, you let us believe you were someone you're not. You let us sacrifice for you." Alexander tried to explain, his voice desperate. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how else to find someone who cared about me for who I am." James stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You made us believe we were doing something good, he said. His voice low and filled with disappointment. But it was all for nothing. It wasn't for nothing. Alexander pleaded. You showed me what real kindness looks like. You reminded me what it means to care about others. I didn't deserve your help. But I'll never forget what you've done for me. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I thought I knew you, she said, her voice breaking. I thought you were someone I could trust. But now, I don't know what to believe. James placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. We need some time, he said firmly, his voice steady but cold. You should go. Alexander felt his heart shatter as he left the house. The warmth and love he had found there were replaced by a chilling silence. As he wheeled himself away, he realized for the first time in his life that no amount of wealth could fix what he had broken.